the terrifying truth about Attica Prison and its violent history. The sound of boots pounding against steel catwalks echoed through Attica Correctional Facility in the early hours of September 9, 1971. Fog clung to the razor wire, muffling the shouts coming from inside the yard. Officers rushed toward the central hub, sirens blaring, radios crackling with fragments of panicked voices. Block D. All units respond, now. Lieutenant Warren Kessler sprinted through the corridor, gripping his keys so tightly his knuckles turned white. He knew something had been building, everyone did. Overcrowded tiers, cold food, barely any showers, medical neglect, tension between staff and inmates thick enough to choke on. Attica had been a pressure cooker for years. But no one expected the pressure to explode today. When Kessler pushed through the gate into D Yard, the scene hit him like a punch. Shouting. Dozens of inmates clustered around the entrance, some armed with makeshift shields fashioned from trays and mattresses. Officers were pinned behind the gate, struggling to hold it shut as inmates forced it open inch by inch. This wasn't chaos. This was coordinated. Inside the yard, inmate Elijah Ward stood at the center of the crowd, not with a weapon, but with a notebook clutched in his hand. His face was steady, voice rising above the noise. Hold the line. No one goes past the yard, keep them together. Ward wasn't a gang leader. He wasn't known for violence. But he was respected, intelligent, strategic. When inmates were ignored, he listened. When tensions escalated, he spoke calmly. And when conditions reached their breaking point, many turned to him for direction. Kessler recognized the danger instantly. Not because Ward was violent, but because he was influential. The gate buckled. Metal screamed. Inmates surged forward. Fall back. An officer shouted, pulling Kessler behind a barricade as the gate finally gave way. In seconds, the yard belonged to the inmates. Inside the control room, alarms stabbed through the building as red lights flashed across the panels. The warden rushed in, breathless and pale. Seal off blocks A through C. Do not lose the central corridor, he ordered. But they had already lost it. Attica's fragile order had cracked, revealing years of buried anger in one terrifying instant. Hours earlier, none of this was visible. The morning began like any other. Cold breakfast. Limited showers. Cells too cramped to hold 4 men but forced to. 1,000 small injustices repeated daily, until they weren't small anymore. Ward had spoken quietly to inmates the night before, not calling for violence, but calling for attention. They won't listen unless we stand together, he told them. But if we don't hold the line peacefully, we lose the message. But the next morning, when an argument between an officer and an inmate escalated in the corridor, everything changed. A push. A scuffle. A door left unsecured. A single moment of weakness in the system. And Attica erupted. By late morning, smoke drifted up from the yard like a warning flare. Inmates secured the area, moved injured people into makeshift aid stations, and began shouting demands through the fence. Medical care. Food fit for humans. Basic rights. Kessler watched from behind riot shields, heart pounding. He had worked in several New York State prisons, but none carried a reputation like Attica. Nothing here stayed small. Nothing here stayed quiet. One officer beside him whispered, "This isn't a riot, it's an uprising." He was right. And at the center of it stood Ward, calm, steady, and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with weapons. Because he understood something the administration hadn't. Influence moved faster than force. Throughout the afternoon, negotiators attempted to establish contact. State officials were called. Observers arrived. Inmates in the yard elected representatives, not gang leaders, but men who could articulate the grievances that had built up for years. Ward was among them. "What you're seeing is the result of silence," he told the observers. "You ignored us until the walls did the talking for us." His words carried weight. Too much weight. By evening, hundreds of inmates chanted in unison as helicopters circled overhead and guards fortified the perimeter. The world outside finally realized Attica wasn't just another prison problem. It was a national crisis. But inside the yard, something else was happening. As night fell, Inmates discovered something unexpected inside a utility shed, something hidden, something that hinted they were being watched and manipulated long before the uprising began. A sealed metal crate. Government marked. But Ward approached it slowly. "What's inside that box?" he asked. No one answered. He knelt beside it, examined the hinges, ran his hand along the rusted latch. And when he pried it open, what he found inside changed the direction of the uprising and the future of Attica forever. The metal crate sat in the center of the yard like an accusation, silent, heavy, and out of place. Inmates formed a semicircle around it, their voices low with unease. Ward ran a hand along the rusted surface again, trying to understand why something marked for state storage was hidden inside a shed that hadn't been opened in years. "What's in it?" someone muttered. "Why is it here?" whispered another. Ward didn't answer. The crate wasn't large, but it carried weight, not physical weight, but the weight of intention. Someone had left it here. Someone had meant for it to be found eventually. Or maybe meant for it to never be found at all. Ward pried it open slowly. Inside lay folders, stacks of printed memos, and sealed envelopes stamped with dates from earlier that year. He lifted the first folder, flipping it open. His eyes widened. The documents detailed internal evaluations of Attica's conditions, overcrowding reports, sanitation complaints, staff shortages, and warnings about rising tensions. Not just routine assessments. These were red flag summaries, the kind that demanded action. But the biggest shock came from the handwritten note clipped to the top. Escalation likely. Recommend temporary reinforcement. Ward exhaled sharply. It wasn't just inmates who had seen the pressure building. Officials had too. And according to these documents, they had anticipated a breakdown long before this day. "You see this?" Ward said to the inmates closest to him. They knew. They knew this was coming. The murmurs grew louder, angrier, more focused. The men weren't confronting officers now, they were confronting evidence of long-term neglect. One inmate pointed at another folder. "What's that one?" Ward opened it. Photographs of corridors with broken plumbing, cells holding twice the intended number of men, mold creeping along the edges of showers, and reports from officers detailing exhaustion and burnout. Not a single page suggested meaningful reform. "These aren't secrets," Ward said. "They're reminders. Reminders of what everyone outside refuses to see." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Kessler stood behind reinforced glass in the command office watching the situation unfold on the monitors. The sight of inmates huddled around the crate sent a chill through him. He knew that crate. It wasn't meant to be left in the yard. It had been moved years ago, during renovations. So why had it resurfaced? "Sir," an officer said behind him, "state officials are asking for an update." Kessler didn't turn. "Tell them the yard is secured by inmates, negotiations pending, and that what's fueling this isn't chaos, it's history." "And the crate?" Kessler paused before answering. "The less Albany knows about that, the better." He wasn't protecting the inmates. He was protecting the truth from being swallowed. Because if those documents reached the outside world unchanged, they would reveal how many warnings had gone unanswered. Back in the yard, inmates gathered around Ward as he laid the documents out on a mattress like cards in a hand he never asked to play. Men who had once shouted now listened. Men who had been restless now grew still. Ward lifted another envelope, sealed, official, stamped with the state seal. Inside was a summary of discussions from the previous year, recommending improvements that had never been implemented. Heating repairs. Additional medical staff. Updated training. Increased recreation time. All postponed indefinitely. Ward felt his stomach tighten. These are delays disguised as decisions. Across the yard, an older inmate clenched his fists. They stalled. And now we're paying for it. Ward didn't disagree. Because the uprising had started with a spark, but these papers proved the fire was built from years of ignored problems. As daylight faded, helicopters circled above Attica, their spotlights sweeping the yard. State troopers gathered on the perimeter. Negotiators from Albany prepared to enter the prison for the first formal talks. Inmates elected representatives again, Men who could speak clearly, calmly, and without panic. Ward was chosen instantly. He stood at the fence as the first negotiator approached, a civilian observer named Langford, brought in to help mediate. Langford raised a loudspeaker. "We're here to listen." Ward stepped forward, lifting one of the documents. "Then you'd better start with this," he said. "Because Attica didn't explode today. It boiled over from everything you already knew." Langford looked uneasy. "We can discuss grievances." Ward cut him off. "No. You'll acknowledge them first." A hush fell over the yard. Ward's voice carried across the open space, firm but steady. "We want humane treatment, medical care, access to basic necessities. And we want assurance none of us will be punished simply for being here when this happened." Langford nodded slowly. "We will bring this to the state." But Ward wasn't done. He held up the crate's contents for the negotiators to see. "And you will explain why warnings were buried while this place fell apart." The negotiators exchanged looks. They hadn't expected proof. They hadn't expected clarity. "Attica didn't fail today," Ward said. "It failed long before." That night, as talks continued, tension hung in the air like smoke. Both sides knew time was running out. And somewhere in the background, beyond the yard, beyond the fences, beyond the negotiations, something else was shifting. A new document was discovered inside the crate. One Ward hadn't seen yet. A document that suggested a decision had been made weeks before the uprising ever began. A decision that would change everything that happened next. And when Ward opened that final envelope, what he read revealed a truth far more unsettling than anyone in the yard expected. Ward unfolded the final envelope with careful, deliberate hands. The yard had gone quiet. Even inmates who normally filled the space with noise felt the shift. Something in Ward's expression changed the moment he glanced at the first page. His jaw tightened, breath stilled, eyes narrowing as if he had just opened a door no one was meant to walk through. "What is it?" an inmate asked. Ward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he read the document again, tracing every line as if he needed to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding it. It wasn't a report. It was a plan. A plan drafted weeks before the uprising. A plan outlining procedures if tensions escalated beyond normal disturbances. It detailed recommended reinforcements, possible negotiation strategies, and, written in stark, emotionless language, a contingency option for retaking the prison using overwhelming force. Ward exhaled slowly. The date on the document sent a cold chill down his spine. August 12, 1971. Nearly a month before the uprising. He lifted the page for the crowd to see. "This wasn't improvised," Ward said. "This wasn't reaction. Someone already expected a breakdown, and they prepared for the worst." The inmates around him stiffened. "You mean they planned this?" one asked. Ward shook his head. "Not planned. Anticipated. Which means they knew how bad things were, and still did nothing." Another voice rose from the group. "What else does it say? Tell us everything." Ward continued reading aloud. The document outlined projected responses, timelines for containment, and communication chains between prison administrators and state officials. It even listed a recommended deadline, the number of days negotiators should tolerate before moving in. A deadline they were rapidly approaching. Ward felt anger pulse through him, not the chaotic kind, but cold, controlled, logical anger, the kind forged from betrayal and truth. "This means whatever happens next isn't just on us," Ward said quietly. "It's on them too." In the command center, Lieutenant Kessler moved between monitors, listening to the updates from the yard. He had not seen the final document, but he felt the shift in negotiation posture. The observers looked nervous. The governor's representatives whispered urgently among themselves. A state trooper commander entered the room, helmet under his arm. "We may need to initiate the final plan soon," he said. Kessler tensed. "That's not a good idea. They're organized, not violent. Give them room." The commander's reply was flat. "Orders are already being discussed." Kessler understood. Discussed wasn't the real word. Prepared was closer. Wait until you see what happens when the next one starts. Hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started.